Welcome to True Norrie's podcast. As always, it's Timmy, and today my co-host is actually James for once. So today we have a very special guest. His name is Josh Connolly. He's from Swindon in England. Josh is a coach, a resilience coach. He's in recovery, amongst other things. You're also an ambassador for the National Association for Children of Alcoholics. You know, and I'd say there's a pile of more stuff, and we'll let you get to all that. So if you just want to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this work that you're in at the moment with the coaching and everything else.
Yeah. Okay. So I've been doing the coaching now sort of full time for, I think, around about 4 years. And I think that came as part of like my recovery journey. It was sort of like, it felt like the next step really in terms of, you know, the passion and the fire that was ignited in me when I sort of found the change in my life to kind of share my learnings. I say I'm a resilience coach, so I work with like individuals and organizations around the world, actually, getting them to look at resilience in what I would call a new way, a way that kind of breaks down some of the old ideas of what I thought resilience was. My old idea of it ultimately nearly killed me. I nearly took my own life in my sobriety. I know a lot of people say, you know, there's the saying that your worst days in your recovery are still better than your best days in your drinking or whatever. That's just not true for me. I've had some desperately difficult times in my recovery, just as difficult as the times when I was drinking. And so a lot of that was born through the belief that I need to keep going, right? That I'm supposed to have it all together, and that ultimately I always believed that the goal was to feel good. And I think there's a little bit of a problem actually in the kind of mental health space, if you want to call it that, where there's this belief now that if you're struggling emotionally in any way, then we call it a mental health problem, right? And we've sort of, I believe in a lot of ways, over-medicalized natural human emotion. And so the resilience that I try and teach is based around coming back to ourselves, really, with the understanding that actually we're supposed to feel a range of emotions. And I'd go so far as to say the belief that I should feel good all of the time was pretty much exactly what drove my addiction, right? That is addiction.
Yeah.
The belief that I shouldn't feel difficult emotions. And so the one thing that's been true for me in the last 9 years since I put down sort of substances, alcohol and drugs, is that I've had 1,000,001 different addictions. 1,000,001 different ways to escape the ways that I feel, yeah? And I'm always finding new, inventive ways that society doesn't call me out on because they're much easier to hide behind. So that's kind of the work that I do. It's centered around coming back to ourselves and allowing ourselves to understand and be with our emotions a lot more.
Mm-hmm. And how did all that come to an end, Josh? You know, was it just complete? Were you using for many years, and did something in your life just kind of say, I can't do this anymore, or was it an incident that happened? You know,
it was like a series of events, right? I'd like to take full responsibility for it, right, and say that it was just like, you know, down to how much I wanted it. And I think I used to kind of sell that idea, but the more that I look at it, listen, I've lost friends who wanted to get sober just as much as I did, all right? They tried as hard as I did, and they're gone. They're not here anymore. So I think it's naive of me to say that I wanted it enough. My truth is that in the end, I sort of recognized that drinking drugs wasn't working.
Mm-hmm.
And it used to for me. When I was younger, I started drinking, I started smoking weed when I was like 12, drink when I was 13, and then Class A's quickly followed, right? And I got to tell you, between the age of 12 and 16 at least, I loved every single minute of it, right? When I was using, because it did everything I ever wanted it to do, right? I know, you know, we often sort of sell the idea that we say, was we ever really enjoying it? I was. Yeah. I mean, my life got good when I was 13 when I started using drugs, right? Mm. And I wasn't like fully hooked on them then, right? But my first daughter was born when I was 18. By the time I was 24, I had 4 children with my now ex-wife. And the drink had stopped working. Like I felt miserable when I was drunk and I felt miserable when I was sober. People say you have to want to do it for yourself. I'm telling you that on the 14th of May 2012, when I woke up with my last hangover, I did not stop drinking for myself. I did it because I had kids. And anybody that gets sober, who's like, I don't know, single with no kids, I think are some of the most incredible people we know, because I don't know if I would have. I got sober because I had kids, and I didn't want to be like my dad to my kids. Eventually, somewhere in that, I found myself. It took me to plan my own suicide when I was about 9 months sober. And then I had an experience with my children that changed everything. And I sort of say,
Josh,
sorry, go on, James.
sorry, do you know when you were in early recovery, and 9 months into recovery, you started planning your suicide? Like I've been in early recovery too, and I can tell you, the first few months sober is the hardest time you'll ever have in your life. Do you know, what was it about that got so overwhelming for you that you wanted to end your life?
I think firstly, I didn't have alcohol and drugs to blame it on anymore. And I still I felt worse. At least when I drank, I could just, I'd drink to blackout, right? And it would go away. I could lose myself for weekends. I could blame the fact that I did X, Y, or Z or whatever I did on the weekend, destroyed my life in a million and one different ways. I could blame it on alcohol and drugs. And here I was at like 3 or 4 months sober. I had like a period of like a month where it genuinely was like brilliant, yeah. But then after that, I was doing the same stuff and I wasn't drinking. I was manipulating people in the same way, really. Trying to get my needs met in ways that, in a million and one different ways. And then secondly, because of all the emotions that come back, the thing is that everyone I knew that was doing recovery was talking about how brilliant it was, right? And if you talked about it being crap in the circles that I was moving in, you weren't doing it right, and you had to try harder. And so I just talked about it being brilliant all the time, yeah? So I was never talking about how I truly felt. And I always say it took me like, I don't know what it was, 12, 13 years to nearly drink myself to death. It took me nearly 9 months to sober myself to death. And I literally, to be honest with you, it wasn't about the pain. It wasn't about wanting the pain to end. I'd always wanted the pain to end. I felt it was the best thing for my kids. I thought, look, I've tried everything. Because I'd have my kids on the weekends, yeah, when I was sober. And I hated it. I hated it. I felt like I hated them. I could not deal with them, right? Yeah. And so I thought I must be a terrible person. But I sort of, what happened was I went to see my kids to say goodbye, and my suicide was planned and ready to go. And in that weekend, because I knew I was going to die, the past became irrelevant and the future was non-existent, right? And for the first time ever in my life, I was present with my kids in a way that I'd never experienced, and I changed my mind. Are you guys still there?
Just give him a second.
You're back.
Just lost. Yeah,
You're back.
lost
You're back.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened there.
You're
I'd
fine.
say the internet connection probably just dropped for a moment or something like that.
All right.
You're fine. You were just talking about you had a plan and then you went to see your kids.
Yeah, and what I was saying is, because I knew I was going to die, because I planned my suicide, the past became irrelevant and the future was non-existent. And for the first time ever in my life, I was present with my kids in a way I'd never experienced, right? I remember cuddling my daughter and feeling it. And I thought to myself, like, this is what it's supposed to be like. I'd always known intellectually that I loved my kids, yeah. But the truth is, at that stage of my life, when I was 24, my eldest was 6. I never felt it. I'd never felt any connection with anybody when I cuddled them, not even my kids. And in that weekend, because everything was irrelevant, because I was going to die, I was present with them. And I changed my mind. And I think the most important thing that came out of that is, like, I thought, if I can recreate that feeling in me, life might actually be all right. And that's when I started then really starting to look inside myself and realized that what was killing me was this, inside of me. And then that sent me on that journey really of exploring my emotions and what I would call my healing journey. That's when it really started.
Yeah,
Consciously anyway.
I'm reading a book at the moment. Actually, Timmy suggested it to me last week because my head was all over the gaff about some issues going on and whatever. Anyway, but The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. But
Yeah.
he was talking about the mind cannot exist when you focus on the moment. He says, and when you'll truly experience that is when death is looming. He says because whatever's in the future and whatever's in the past, that doesn't exist anymore, and all you have is the here and the now. And it's brilliant for you to be able to explain, because obviously I've never been in a situation where, like, I've had a suicide attempt, Josh, but I didn't have that kind of. It was very heavily under the influence. It sounds like you had a lot of clarity around what you were doing and very coherent. But it's brilliant for you to explain, like, how, when you take your mind out of what's going to happen in the future or what happened in the past and you have the here and now, then you begin to see the value of your life, and it gives you a bit of a coping skill.
Yeah. And you see that happens, by the way, like you guys are in recovery. Like the most amazing moments for me is when I almost accidentally get lost in that moment. I might be like playing Snakes and Ladders with my daughter, right? And for that split second, I'm completely in it, right? And we're messing about. And then you come round and you go, wow. Like for a moment, I was right here in it. I wasn't thinking about anything else. And listen, my truth is, despite all the work that I do, those moments are fleeting. Yeah. And so I only ever seem to accidentally get in them, and they're some of the most amazing experiences of my recovery, without question.
I can definitely relate to a lot of what you said about your kids, because when I started in my recovery journey, I had 2 kids as well, and a partner as well. She's now my wife. A lot of people do question how she stayed with me during the madness, but she did, thankfully. And together now we're very, very happy, But going back to what I was going to say, with the kids, right? You spoke about how you became aware, knowing that was probably going to be your last moment spending with your kids, and me, on a personal level, meditation was the key to me really saving my life, because that little bit of awareness that you got, I was able to create that through 2-3 hours a day just meditating, because I had such a messed up head, right? In early recovery, that I wanted to take my own life. I couldn't handle the pain. There was days that I spent early recovery, Josh, in prison, and there was days while I was inside in the prison, and I would be actually praying that my partner would ring me and say, do you know what, it's not working out, we'll forget about it, so I could go back using in the prison, or drinking or whatever, but it didn't happen, and I started strengthening that awareness you spoke about with meditation on a daily basis, and I started separating myself from all those negative thought patterns from my childhood, because I had a traumatic childhood as well, where I wasn't really able to understand life too well when I put the drink and drugs down. As you know yourself, drinking drugs takes you away from all your emotions and feelings, but also your thinking that's connected to emotions and feelings, and I think your explanation of it there was mind-blowing, because I'd say there's actually quite a few men and women can relate to what you exactly said, that want to commit suicide, and just having that little blessed moment with a child or a loved one, and just said, you know what, I don't think this is for me, so
Yeah.
I just needed to jump in and just tell you
And
how much I thought of that.
yeah, no, it was brilliant. And another thing you mentioned there a while ago, Josh, around not all of the drug and alcohol use was doom and gloom. And I was smiling as you were talking, because sometimes when I think back, some of the best memories I have are taking ecstasy with my friends and, being partying. But do you think that for people like ourselves that grew up with some issues, do do you think that a form of drug use is a form of resilience? It may be the only coping skill you have available to you, and you use that to help you get through that period of your life.
You know, one of the things I've started saying, because I talk about my healing journey starting 9 years ago when I stopped drinking alcohol, right? I changed my language to start saying my healing journey consciously started 9 years ago. I believe my healing journey started when I was 12 years old when I smoked cannabis. That was the first time I started to look for things to help me deal with the ways that I felt. Yeah. I think it's Russell Brand's book, one of his first ever books. And he said he spoke to a therapist very early on in his recovery. And he told her that he started using drugs whenever he did. And she said, well done for finding a way to keep yourself alive. And like that really resonates with me because that's what I was doing, right? And, you know, people talk about falling into the wrong crowd and stuff like that. I was in gangs and stuff when I was like 12, 13. I didn't fall into anything. I went there. I found my people. Because the people in the gangs, were the same as me, abandoned in some way. Maybe not necessarily as, you know, drastically by an alcoholic parent, but they were abandoned in some way. And, you know, you talk about resilience. What would I say makes a resilient teenager or a resilient child? Having meaning in their life, feeling like there's a purpose, feeling like I'm wanted and needed, feeling like I'm heading somewhere, feeling like people need me. You'll find that there's 5 I've just reeled off the top of my head. You'll find all of those in a gang. And we exist in a, you know, without going too deep, we exist in a society that ultimately doesn't give people like me and people like yourselves the tools to be able to deal with, because the ways that I reacted to what was going on doesn't fit the system. And you know, when I was throwing chairs about in classrooms, it makes a lot of sense when you look at my story and you start to understand. You know, I was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. I'll tell you, my anxiety disorder looked a lot less disordered when you look at the disordered environment in which it first existed in. Like, it made sense for me to be anxious all of the time, to be in fight or flight. Of course it did. You know, and my inability to be present made sense when I was led in bed at night and I could hear my mum and dad fighting. And I hear my mum say that, you know, you need to stop shouting, you're going to wake the boys up, she used to say. I don't want them to hear this. I don't want them to hear this. And listen, I'm 4 or 5 years old, squeezing my eyes tight as I can, trying to go to sleep. And my brain developed a way to tune me out. My brain developed a way for me to not be present. And the problem is that doesn't serve me as an adult anymore, but it's much harder to overcome. I do a lot of breath work, right? It's one of the ways I bring myself present. To be honest with you, if I could live my life just laid on my back, doing breathing exercises 24/7, I don't feel like I'd ever have a problem anywhere. Do you know what I mean? But I can't. Life happens, and so that's, you know, and that's when these things comes up. The trauma stuff from when I was a child plays out in my relationships. I can sit in front of you two now, talk about all my thoughts and feelings. Yeah, you put me in front of somebody I'm desperately seeking attachment from, I start saying I'm okay. Yeah, no, I'm fine, brilliant, got this stuff nailed down. Because when I'm seeking attachment, I abandon myself and just start trying to give that person what I think they want to hear, you know? And that's part of the kind of stuff that I, you know, that comes from the things that I grew up with.
Do you know, a few weeks ago we spoke to Gabor Mate, and he spoke, I think Timmy was talking to him about, we were talking to him about shame, anxiety, fear, and all these emotions and negative feelings that we feel from childhood into our adulthood, and we were asking him about how to cope with that. And he said, be friendly to it. That helped you at a point in your life, you know. But no, it's still there today, but you don't need it today. But just acknowledge it. Don't judge it. It's neither good nor bad. And thank it. You know what? You helped me when I was a child. You helped that anxiety helped to keep me on edge. You know, when there was stuff going on at home, and like what you were saying there, your brain switched off to take away from the violence and the shouting in the home. Like, it helped you at a certain point, but it doesn't serve you in adulthood, like you rightly said. But we still have it, but it's just to be aware of it and not be driven by it.
Yeah, and I think, like, speaking about it in that way, in the kind of Gabor Mate way, is a lot less shaming than simply labeling it as some kind of disease that's like wrong with me, a part of me that needs fixing, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot now when I can refocus myself and say to myself, I'm no longer a defenseless child, right? I'm an adult. I can use my intellect now. I can use my strength. I can use all those things, yeah, that I didn't have when I was a child, and I developed those things. And I think it's so important to look at all of that, those parts of ourselves with compassion. I don't know if you've ever heard of Internal Family Systems by a guy called Richard Schwartz.
Yeah.
That's similar stuff to that. That starts to, rather than believing that we actually wore masks, which is what I used to say, actually we developed parts of ourselves, right, that served a purpose and were there to try and protect me. And actually that brings in so much compassion, because, you know, like you said about the drug use, was that a form of resilience, right? It was an attempt at altering the way that I felt so that I could navigate the world in the way that I wanted to. The same as the gangs, yeah? The same as when I sold drugs, right? The same as when I got involved in football violence when I was 17 years old. You can trace it all back to the same thing, right? That feeling that in and of myself I'm not enough. And so I need to create attachment in those certain ways. And I was led by all of that stuff all of the time.
And you're always going to be leaning towards people that are exactly the same as you, because the energy within the group is the same. You know, that's what I found when I started in secondary school. I leaned, like yourself, I leaned towards the gangs, the group of people that were exactly like me. They came from homes that were chaotic. There was a lot of violence and addiction and different things like that, you know, and it just makes a lot of sense as well when you say it like that. You know, we fit into the group exactly the same as ourselves, and nobody dragged me into any group either. I walked in there with my hands opened because I got love off them. I got love that I wasn't getting everywhere else, you know. I think it's a great way of just explaining it, you know, how different people and kids move into different groups, you know, in their teenage years and stuff like that. What do you think, James?
Yeah, no, I think the only people who think that we went down a wrong path and got in with the wrong crowd are maybe our parents. Say stuff like that, you know. Oh, my James wouldn't do anything like that if it wasn't for that fella across the road, you know. But
James was at the top of the group, like James was up the front, one with the big stone, not the small stone, the big one.
Everybody's mother is saying the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. But you know what? That happens on a societal level, right? Because if you look at like even we call it the county lines in England. I don't know if you say the same stuff like in Ireland, yeah.
Yeah.
But like everyone's like county lines. It's these big things. They're employing these youngsters when they're young, and all of that stuff's true, right? But it's easier for us as a society to look at that stuff, right, than it is to go, why are we raising so many kids in our own society on our watch that feel like they want to go and use them gangs? Because if you grow up in a much less a much more functional family environment where you're loved by at least one loving and nurturing adult who's able to be there and help you comprehend all of your emotions, you won't go in the gangs. So the real solution is, if as a society we start saying, what are we doing to these kids? Yeah. Because if you think about any other species of animals, yeah, if they all started killing themselves, if dogs all started running in front of cars purposely, right, you'd say, who's raising these puppies? What environment is these dogs being raised in to do that? And yet when it's human beings, because as a society we don't want to look at the fact that we don't invest in our children at all anymore unless they're academic, yeah, so then it's easier to blame the gangs. It's easier to, tougher prison sentences, for example. Yeah, everyone goes, yeah, brilliant, tougher prison sentences, that's exactly what we need. It looks like a result. We can go 20,000 more people were in prison last year. That's 24,000 more criminals off the streets. But if you look at the correlation between parental imprisonment, right, and the children themselves going on to go into prison themselves, putting more people away in prison is actually perpetuating the problem. And so rather than saying, well done, we've got 20,000 more people in prison, why aren't we questioning why the hell we've created 20,000 more people that need to go to prison? Because that's about what we do for children, you know?
You made a great point there about starting with the children. I would be a really big believer in catching the problems and looking at how we can develop kids in a way that they can do things like, be healthy adults when they get older. For instance, say some kids are going home to a really toxic environment where there's a lot of drug and alcohol abuse at the home, and there might be violence and neglect and all these different things. But if they're going into a childcare facility or a play school where there's really well people that understand how neglect and violence affect a child's brain, if we have these people in these places and they know how to counteract these things that are going on at home with some love and teaching them nice behaviours, I think there is where we need to be looking. And you don't see the results of something like that for maybe 15, 16 years when these teenagers, they're not 2 and 3 anymore. Now they're 16 and 17 and they're more relaxed because they were taught certain beliefs while they were in play school and all these different things. I would be a big advocate towards that. Let's start looking at the bottom up. Not trying to put work into teenagers that are 14 and 15 and they're out of control and they won't listen to nobody. No, I don't mean not put work into them, but why not put some more work into young kids when they're in schools like that,
When they're looking for that solution, yeah? Because listen, when I was 14 and I'm doing pills,
yeah,
you're competing against pills.
Yeah.
And that ain't easy. Because you can come in and tell me, do this, do that, you're going to make, and I'm thinking, mate, you want to try pills? Because everything you're saying, I get in an instant, yeah? And I say this to schools, they get me in for early prevention work, right? And I work with, they send me the kids that have all started using drugs. And I'm sitting down across the table from a young lad who I know smoking weed, right? And I think, so I say to him, look, when you get to like 20 years old, it's going to really mess your life up. And he looks at me and thinks, I don't care about being 21 years old. Because I didn't care about being 21 years old. We need to work with kids when they're like 6, 7, 8. Because when I was 6, 7, 8, I was crying out for something. I was crying out for it. And when I didn't get it, I went and found it myself, and that's when I found drugs. And so what I didn't, what I didn't have in my family environment that I lived in, my dad was quite a violent, angry, chaotic man, and my mum was wrapped up in my dad's drinking. And so I didn't have anybody to help me comprehend any of my emotions. So I didn't want to burden my mum with my sadness. I saw her sad. I watched my mum cry all the time when I was a kid. So I learned to keep my sadness in and make my mum laugh. And I never learned how to be sad. I never learned that, when you talk about sad stuff, it's all right to let emotion come out. I learned to push that down. And then I never learned how to be with my sadness, right? If I ever talked when I was a kid about, I don't know, being like scared, I was, you got nothing to be scared of, yeah? If I was upset, there was children over the other side of the world that had it way worse than me, yeah? If I was angry, don't you dare act like that in this house or you can get out. And so I found ways to not be with myself. And one of them ways was drugs and alcohol, and it worked so good.
Yeah.
It worked so good. Now, the kind of counter to that is if we could have more loving and nurturing adults available in school settings, because teachers aren't that. They're so busy academically, they don't get to be present with the kids. I thought about my drama teacher loads when I wanted to die, yeah. He used to ask me the reason he saved my life in some occasions. Why? Because on a Monday, even if I'd been a nightmare in his lesson the week before, he'd say, Josh, I remember you got beat 1-0 playing football last week. How did you get on this weekend? And at 11, 12 years old, no other adult in my life was asking me that. No other adult was remembering about the week before. No other adult was like, putting in boundaries, telling me when I behaved badly that I can't behave like that, and then going back to treating me like a normal kid. Because all the other teachers, or a lot of them, adultified me very quickly. Like I became like an adult who shouldn't be doing the things that was. Nobody looked at what am I trying to tell people here? You know what I mean? Because I couldn't deal with the silence of a classroom. I was addicted to chaos. Of course I was. It's the environment. I remember going to a friend's house when I was like 8 for the first time ever, and walking in the dining room, and the mum and dad had sat down having a cup of tea. And I remember looking around and thinking, what the hell is going on in here? Whoa, is it gonna go off? What's going on? It was alien to me. I created chaos because that's what made me feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And yet every day I had to go and sit in silence in a classroom, normally at the front. It used to make me really paranoid because there's 30 people behind me. You know, and none of that was looked at when I was a child, you know. And so, of course, that perpetuated the shame. The system essentially brought more shame on me.
Yeah.
It confirmed in me what I believed, that there's something wrong with me.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier on there about kind of negative outcomes for children of imprisoned parents. And I know when I was a child, and I would have had a father in prison. And when I went into secondary school, which would be high school, where in England, you know, from the teenage years, you know, I would have had a lot of behavioural issues. I couldn't sit still. The anxiety you spoke about, lack of concentration, just a lot of behavioural issues. Even though I obvious academic ability, just not being able to apply myself for a load of reasons that weren't pointed out to me then. But at the time, the teachers label you as stupid, a thug, doesn't want to learn, bold, disruptive, all these. But when you spoke there about no wonder I was the way I was, you know, and I always look back, and you know, I have a great relationship with my father today and my mother. But I always look back just to try to get some understanding as to why it didn't work out for me in school, you know. And when I started studying criminology, I was reading about literature around children of imprisoned parents, and there's a lot of research to show like that. Yeah, they do find it hard to sit still. They do find it hard to concentrate. They do find it hard to, you know, just kind of, you know, just be that quiet pupil down the back of the class that says yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir, you know. But by the time people like me, and there's loads of children like me in school today, by the time they leave school, they feel like they're stupid, they feel like they're no good. It kills the self-esteem. But one thing you said there as well, which kind of made me smile, was around that one teacher, you know, in the midst of all that case, you had that one teacher. And I remember around the time when my dad went to prison, I was in 6th class, which when you're about 12 years of age, you know. But I had been in hospital for about 6 weeks. I was in intensive care with a burst appendix and a lot of complications anyway. But I was always big into Irish history. And I remember I went back to school after being out for about 2 months, and my 6th class teacher, Mr. O'Sullivan, when I came into the class, he says, right, and today, lads, we're going to cover Irish history. And he kept it for me because he knew that was my favourite, you know what I mean? And it's just like one of those moments where you think, you know what, he actually remembered and he actually cared. But sadly, those teachers are very few and far between, would you think?
I do, yeah. Because look, I think a lot of teachers would love to be like that, right? But they're under so much pressure academically, they haven't got time. And then also, like as a child, I was hiding so much. I mean, I used to go and visit my dad in prison, right? And I remember I always felt like he was trying to get stuff out of me, right? Which he was, because he was in prison, right? And he was like, him and my mum had split up, but my mum had met my stepdad, right? Who she's still with now, incredible, amazing man. But I remember once saying that we'd been out for the day when we was visiting my dad, and he looked at me and he said, where did you go? And I told him, and it was far away from where we lived. And I can remember it vividly. I must have been about 6. He looked me straight in the eye. He said, how did you get there? And I said my stepdad's name. And this was on a Sunday, day before school. My dad beat my mum up in the visiting centre, right? And what happened? We're shuffled out of there. My mum doesn't know how to deal with that. She's an incredible woman, but she got no support. She doesn't know how to deal with that. So what does she do? Get in the car, squash it. It's nothing. Don't worry about it. We never talk about it again.
Yeah.
I'll go to school the next day. I don't know how I'm acting, but I was way into like recovery from drinking. I used to say, oh, he grabbed her by the hair and gave her a few kicks, right? Because I couldn't comprehend that experience. I hadn't even digested it and like thought about the impact it had on me. And, you know, got my own kids, and I started seeing my kids reach these ages. And my dad died when I was 9. And I remember when my first daughter got to 9 years old, and all this stuff was coming up for me. And it was because I used to say my dad died when I was 9 and I don't really remember it. And then I was looking at my 9-year-old daughter thinking there's absolutely no way I don't remember it. Look at her. And it brought up all this emotion was coming out of me. And I had to do all that. I had to comprehend all of my emotions as an adult and find safe spaces to do it now, right? Because I never did it when I was a kid. Never had anyone to help me do it.
Did you go to counselling sessions for something like that, Josh? How did you deal with all those emotions and
As an
feelings?
adult,
Yeah.
I tried a bit of therapy and I couldn't really get on with it, if I'm honest with you. I did a lot of 12 steps work originally at the beginning of my recovery, and I think the actual group side of it, of being around particularly other men, right? I've always had a real, less so now, but in my early recovery, I struggled with men, right? I could only be very bravadoed around them, right? I never knew what it was like to have a man care for you, right? I knew how to say, "I got your back. If it goes off, I'll have it," right? Yeah, let's do it. I knew how to do that, even though I was terrified of that kind of stuff. I didn't know how to care for another man, and I didn't know how to have a man care for me. And I learnt that probably in the rooms originally, and I got rid of a lot of stuff in that way. And then when I found Nakoa, which was like, I don't know, probably like 6-7 years ago, I started having a lot of conversations with some of the people there. And that was the first time people started to listen to me and not try and fix it. You know, like whenever I used to talk about my childhood, people would always wrap it up nicely for me. So, you know, I would say I felt let down by my dad, or it was difficult. You know, I almost feel sometimes let down by my mum, right? And I thought saying that stuff meant that I didn't love her fully, so I would never say it. But I didn't know that you can love somebody deeply, but just feel a little bit hurt and let down by some of the things. And but you know, people would always say things like, "I made you who you are today," and you know, your mum did the best she could. And I know all of that, right? But I needed people to just listen and hear all the difficult emotions. My problem was never the absence of gratitude or the absence of seeing the good in things. I had had no choice but to do that all of my life. When my dad died, my mum, the incredible woman that she is, thought, despite everything, I don't want the kids to remember that my dad as being a bad person. So she only told us the good stuff. And whenever we brought up the bad stuff, she'd say, "No, he was a good man. He just drink got the better of him," right? But so all of my life, what I've missed and not had is people holding space for me to talk about the difficult emotions. And that's kind of what I found in the co-op. The ability to say, you know, I feel like I wonder if my dad ever I wonder if my dad ever looked at me the way I look at my boys. I wonder if that weekend I had with my kids, right? I wonder if my dad ever had moments like that with me. And that's uncomfortable to say that, right? But often people struggle with that uncomfortableness, so they take those moments away from you and they wrap them up nicely. I needed people to let me be with that uncomfortableness, to bring it out, to have the ability to ask questions. You know, I stopped drinking for my kids, right? There will always be a part of me that wonders why my dad couldn't stop for me. Now, I can tie that up nicely for you and say addiction's a terrible thing. You know, it got hold of him. He was a good man before. And I know all of that. And I know all of that intellectual stuff. And there'll always be a part of me that questions, why wasn't I enough? Right? And I used to think I need to change that. And actually what I've needed to do is become a little bit more comfortable with knowing that that's a lingering wound from what I experienced. You know, I know the intellectual stuff, and there's always there's pain there, and there likely always will be to a degree, and that's okay. That's appropriate based on what I've experienced. You know.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about Nakoa? Is that like a self-help organisation or?
Well, we are mainly a helpline, anonymous helpline that any child affected by a parent's drinking can call. So adults can call too, but we get a lot of children as young as 5 years old ringing the helpline. Now, the helpline is anonymous. It won't show up on the phone bill. And one of the main beliefs that we have why the helpline is so important is because we believe that a child's access to support shouldn't be dependent upon their parents reaching some kind of recovery. There's services have always been available to a degree, but it's if I go into recovery, then I might be able to get support for my kids. But what happens if I never go into recovery? What we found 6 years ago is that no constituents in England and Wales, zero, had any plan whatsoever for a child affected by a parent's drinking. So we did a massive campaign and we changed that in 4 years. We got it up to 75% of constituents now have a plan for children affected by parents drinking. It was like we were on the front page of the papers in England. I delivered a lecture at the House of Commons at the launch of the first ever manifesto. We managed to secure like 6.5 million funding for across England for it's just been cut, by the way, after that funding. But originally the funding was there because we talked about children of alcoholics like being the silent victim. Because what happens for a lot of these kids is even if the parent gets sober, I hear people in recovery say things like, my recovery is more important than my children.
Yeah.
And I just think, I hope your kids never hear you say that.
Yeah.
Because listen, I'll tell you something now. I got like young kids. I've got teenage kids as well. But my young kids, if I ain't here, I ain't here. My kids don't care where I am. And if I ain't present with them, I can be here physically and not be present. My kids will know. And so my healing has to be with my children, particularly my children that, my eldest was 6 when I quit drinking. That's a lot of brain development based on an environment that existed. And I don't reflect on that morbidly, but I have to admit that she's going to be impacted by that. Otherwise, I'm still running away. And that's hard. My eldest, for example, has attachment struggles. There's no doubt about it. Has struggles, problems with attachment. That's because of the environment that she was brought into, that I existed in. I either turn my eye to that or I say, listen, I've got to do the best I can for us all to try and heal together. So I think that's really important. And I think, that's why I'm so passionate about the kind of work that we do with NACOA, because there's 1 in 5 children in England anyway that are living with a parent that drinks too much. 1 in 5. That's a lot.
I'd say similar statistics here in Ireland. I'm not sure if there's an Irish equivalent of that organisation.
I don't think there actually is, James. I've never heard of anything like that. A children's helpline for, all we have here really is Childline, really, and that's for all forms of abuse, but like NACOA sounds like something should be in every country, because I can completely relate and understand how important it would be to have an organisation like that, a young child that can't see anywhere to go, anyone to turn to, but if they have somebody on the end of a phone, that understands them. How does that work then, Josh? Like if that child is really, it talks like it's been neglected or it's been abused, emotionally, how do you have, is the onus on you then to get somebody to that house, a social worker or something like that?
So we have like safeguarding rules, but we don't push for any identifying. We don't tell people they have to give us a name or anything like that. So if somebody rang up and they said, I'm Josh Connolly, and I don't know, my parents abusing me, right? Then and I live here. Then of course, with the safeguarding routines would be followed. There's like a fine line here though, because I always say when I was a kid, I would never have rang the helpline, right? Because I was so like, that was the ultimate betrayal to my family, right? Because of the way that we connived together to keep the family secret subconsciously, right? But I don't think I would never ever have rang it. We get lots of callers that ring and don't say anything. And then we'll have them and they'll say, I've rang 10 times and hung up because I'm so scared that you're going to trace who I am and come and get my mum and dad. So the one thing that I always say is we have to be really, really careful that helping a child does not become a trade-off of how much information they're willing to give us. Because if a child has to give us information about who they are, if they want to talk about the ways that they feel, we're going to miss so many of these kids. That's the truth. So we give them the opportunity to talk. Look, the truth is that, you know what, most of them talk, they live with their parent being like they are every day. They ring up and they want to talk about the exam that they did well in at school today. You know, they want to talk about falling out with their friend who they've been friends with for ages. Normal conversations that every child deserves to have. We sometimes read bedtime stories to these kids.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Because that's what they're missing.
Quite emotional.
Yeah, listen, I did the training to become a helpline counsellor. We've got loads of like online stuff. So we've got like message boards online. We do loads on social media. When I went to work on a helpline, people can email as well. And I never answered the phone. I used to go there and think I'm going to answer it today. And I just thought, it's going to be no good me being on the phone, right? Because I'd be just bawling my eyes out. Do you know what I mean? So I was like, let me read the emails, bawl my eyes out, and then reply to emails. And that's as far as I ever got on the helpline. And then I went into an ambassador's role, and now I do a lot of like kind of awareness raising and other stuff.
That's like me watching, you know, there's ads back here, a Bernardo's ad, they throw them on the telly every once in a while for donations, and it's like every time I see that ad, I'm like this behind my wife crying, like, because I feel the pain of that child, you know, I know exactly what it's like to feel exactly how that little boy or little girl feels caught up in these situations, you know, it's very sad, like.
Yeah, it's important to have boundaries with that stuff, right? Otherwise, I'd be running about trying to save the world and completely ignoring myself and my family and just thinking that I need to save every single child who I see in pain, you know? So I've got to be quite a bit careful with my boundaries on that stuff.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So just the other thing, right? Sorry, James. You do a lot of resilience coaching as well, Josh, you know, for big companies and stuff. You know, can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's very, very important. Your what you do for companies and for schools and just teaching kids what real resilience is and stuff like that. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so a lot of the like corporate work that I do, I've sort of rolled out a lot of my training globally with some big companies, and it's, to be honest with you, it's been centered around the idea that I can't really tell you what's good for you. Right, because I don't really know what's good for you. I barely know what's good for myself, right? So true resilience really is about coming back to ourselves and understanding our struggles so that we can build the resources in our life to be able to deal with them. I'm sensitive, right? I get overwhelmed easily. I used to think that made me weak. It doesn't make me weak, right? If I see my sensitivity for what it is and I build the things in my life to be able to deal with it, it's not a weakness. And so resilience is about our authenticity, to bring in Gabor Mate's definition, understanding what we're feeling, knowing what we need as a result, and then being able to communicate that, right? So it's literally about teaching people to come back to themselves. Stop believing that you need to keep going. Stop believing that you need to keep moving forward all of the time. That's not resilience, right? That's just blindly going towards your grave, right? Yeah. Come back to yourself. Know when you're struggling. Find the resources. How much help and support do you need? You're allowed to have people around you. Resilience is not something where I need to be able to do this on my own, right? It's about knowing when I'm struggling. I always use the boxing analogy. You know, Anthony Joshua, the heavyweight? Yeah? You remember when he beat Klitschko?
Yeah.
And everybody remembers I think it was the 11th round, there was the famous uppercut and Klitschko's head looks like it's coming off of his shoulders. That's the famous photo that everybody remembers from that fight, right? And
he was getting beaten. He was getting beaten at that stage, though, wasn't he?
Exactly. This is the point. We remember that big punch because Anthony Joshua was the big heavyweight coming forward, right? But in round 7, Klitschko put him on his backside, and for 2 rounds, Anthony Joshua ran away. Now, that running away in boxing, we call it taking a round off, right? That's resilience, because that's knowing I need to not get hit here because I'm going to get knocked out. So he took 2 rounds off and he went on to win the fight. Now you can take that a step further. He went on to fight Andy Ruiz afterwards, yeah? at the time, Wilder had just fought the night, I think it was like the week before, knocked someone out in like the second round. Anthony Joshua got put on his backside by Ruiz in the third round and thought to himself, I can't take a round off here because I'll get caned for it. So he kept coming forward, and we all know what happened. He got beat. And so his resilience had gone because he believed he needed to keep coming forward, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's true in life. The real tough guys, yeah, if you want to call them that, they know who they are. They know when they're overwhelmed, when they need to take time off. And, you know, I needed to learn a lot of that because from a very young age, I've always been desperate to be a man. You know, I went and got tattoos as quickly as I could. I used to shave my head because I wanted to look tough. I grew a beard as quickly as I could. That was only about 3 years ago. I think I eventually was able to grow a beard. But you know, like my general thinking all the time was always to try and be a man, because internally I felt like the things that I struggled with weren't manly, right? You know, I didn't want to work on a building site. And I thought real men work on building sites because that's all I ever really grew up around. So, so that, you know what I mean? But it's understanding that actually you be who you are, right? You don't have to be anything other than who you are. And that's resilience. And then when I do it in schools, it's slightly different. And it's just introducing to young people to the idea that you're allowed to feel a range of emotions, right? You're allowed to struggle. That's normal. The best people struggle. Taking away the idea that there's positive and negative emotions, and there's just emotions and they're all signals. And if we can come back to ourselves, then we've got more opportunities to be able to move through life without having to escape who we are. Yeah. Without having to escape who we are as much, at least. I think everybody does it at least a little bit.
Yeah. Do you know what? One of my most favorite words is in recovery, in life, really, is. Yours would be the resilience there, and I understand it. Mine would be surrender deeply into that moment right now where you usually in the past would have ran away from that feeling, but surrender into it and feel it, no matter how bad it is. It could be anything, shame, fear, guilt. That's where the healing is, when you surrender and you accept it for what it is, you know, and you're actually healing experiences that may have happened in your childhood or your teens, and you mightn't even remember them, but you're healing that trapped emotion that's inside in your body, you know. I think it's amazing your work there with the kids and stuff, and your coaching is absolutely fantastic. Myself and James will have to get a few pointers off camera off here, because we're thinking of going down that route and maybe doing a bit of it. I know James does a bit of it already, but yeah, I'll have to find my little niche in it. I'll have to find something.
Well, look, I'll give you a tip right now, right? Yeah. Resilience was a big buzzword when I got into this. I took resilience, and then I used that as a way of kind of bringing this healing work into the mainstream. Yeah. That's really what I've done. If we're being really clear here, I've took resilience, and I've brought in that surrender that you talk about. Yeah, and I've brought some of this healing work that I think everybody needs to some degree, and I've brought it mainstream. That's really what I've done. So that's the idea, is taking some of the language that we might use in recovery and healing and all of that stuff, and then how's that going to make sense in the corporate world? Yeah. So that's what I did with resilience, and that is why it's taken off in the way that it has. Mm-hmm. So many of my new clients that come to me saying, we've done loads of resilience training, right? But we're looking for somebody a little bit more human because it's all been a bit robotic.
Yeah, it's so very much stepped.
Yeah, because people are yearning for what you guys are talking about. People are yearning for what we're talking about on this podcast, right? But they don't even know it, and that's the problem. They don't even know it. They don't know it until they get it. Yeah. And so that's kind of what I've been able to do with the resilience stuff, is bring it to them behind the guise of resilience, really.
Yeah. But some of the stuff
using your own life experience, isn't it, James?
Yeah, exactly. And some of the stuff I would talk about is around like a lot of the skills you develop in addiction and then recovery are very transferable in the corporate world. For example, resilience would be one, determination, setting goals. Like you have to be able to plan to come from addiction and prison to go on to do good things with your life, you know, and work in organisations, be a manager or get a bachelor's degree or whatever, you have to be dedicated, you have to work hard, you have to access support, you have to plan, have short-term goals, long-term goals. So that's the kind of stuff I would kind of bring into the corporate world, you know, and but I like that. Then if you're speaking in schools, then obviously it would be kind of different, do you know what I mean? Because it's a different audience, everything is age appropriate. But I never go into schools thinking, you know, what comes into my mind, South Park, the drugs counsellor, drugs are bad, okay, drugs are bad. Like, kids don't want to hear that, you know what I mean? And it's the most natural thing in the world for a young person in their teens to want to experiment with something, you know? So it's just about how you can do that as safe as possible if you must do it, you know, and not pull the wool over children's eyes and scaremonger kids, because I don't believe that scaremongering kids steers them away from drugs, you know. If anything, it makes them more curious to try, because they're like, well, you use drugs for a load of years and you look fine today, do you know what I mean? So I don't believe that. I don't believe you, you know?
Yeah, and I remember as a kid being sat in lessons being taught about drugs, thinking, and they were telling me stuff, and I was thinking, I've done that before I come in here. And what you're telling me happens doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
So you're lying to me. So I don't believe anything that you say about drugs. And actually, some of the work that I do with the kids, like, some schools get me in to talk about like the gang stuff or like knife violence, knife crime and stuff. And then, so I've had schools, they come to me and they what they think I'm going to do is come in and try and scare them away from it, right? And that I'm going to say, you know, it'll be really bad, and it got so bad for me. This is how bad it got for me, right? And I know that won't work, because when I was a kid, I thought I was Tony Montana. So I would have just thought, you're doing it wrong if someone like me had come in and said that, right? So what I do is I take things like, I do a session where I look at the main reasons given by young people why they carry a knife. And I think like the top 4 is like to gain respect, to want to be big, right? For protection. I can't remember the other one. But then I asked the teenagers, I say, why might someone want to be big? And of course they all mess about at the beginning, but what you get to is why they might feel small. I go, all right, well, why might someone feel small? And they go, well, because nobody's ever really built them up. Okay, good. So now we're starting to get towards why somebody might become vulnerable to getting involved in these things. Because if we can address that, then there might be some hope. And what I do is I address it as, how do you help your friend who's doing this? Because nobody wants to be in a session thinking, well, I'm carrying a knife and he's talking to me. So I go in and I say, let's talk to the friends, yeah? And you do the same with respect. Why might someone want respect? Why they feel disrespected? Well, why might they feel disrespected? Why do you think they've never ever felt respected? And they're like, well, nobody's ever made them feel it. Who do you think should make them feel it? Their parents. All right, okay, so maybe they've got a difficult home life. And then you get into that thing then where we start looking at these people with a bit more compassion, rather than trying to scare them away. Because I could go in and say, this happened, and I was kidnapped when I was a kid, and da-da-da. But I got to tell you, when I was 14, that would have made me buzz my face off. I'd have been like, I'm bang up for getting kidnapped for drugs, man. I'm bang up for that. Like the scare tactics I can try and give would have made me buzz when I was a kid. So that's why it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like it's like you say, James, it becomes an advert for it, if anything.
Yeah. So Josh, we're coming towards the end there, but have you got anything to promote, anything exciting coming up? Are you working on any projects, and how can people contact you or follow you?
Yeah, so I've just become a certified breathwork practitioner, actually. So doing like, I don't know if you've ever done any conscious connected breathing. It's incredible, right? Seriously, it's like, it's transformed me. Especially, Timmy, if you like meditation and stuff, if you do like this breathwork stuff, it's amazing. So I'm going to be trying to bring that a little bit more to the mainstream in a way that's not too out there. So people can watch out for that.
It's called conscious connection meditation.
Conscious connected breathing is called. So essentially you do breath work where you breathe into the body and then out, but there's no rest. So it's just, and you do that for about 20 minutes. You do it to music. And then after 20 minutes, when you let it go, I mean, you're tripping your face off. I don't want to exaggerate it.
Massive DMT experience, like
it is like that. Yeah. It's like that, but just literally through the breath. So I want to kind of bring that to the forefront and make it a little bit more accessible. So yeah, but the best way, look, my website's joshconnolly.co.uk, and I'm Josh_FFW on Instagram, and that's probably where I'm busiest if you want to come and find me.
Excellent. Speaking of DMT, what you think of my sister's psychedelic flag in the background? It's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah, love it. I'm all for all of that stuff.
Did you ever do ayahuasca, Josh?
Sorry?
Have you done ayahuasca?
I haven't, right? And
I have done it.
You've done it. Was it good?
It will blow your mind, especially now that you're doing this form of breathing exercises. You'll go into that, into the ayahuasca session, and you'll really, really benefit from it. Trust me on that, pal.
Can I ask you, right, just very quickly, the only worry I have about doing it, right, is every other drug I've ever done in my life that I loved, has made the rest of my life feel crap. As in, like, when I did pills, it was just like, everything else, it just pales to insignificance. I just can't wait to do more pills, right? That's the same with weed, cocaine, all of it. Why does that not happen with ayahuasca?
Because it's so much different. I felt love for the first time during my ayahuasca session. I've done it for 3 nights, and I felt love for the first time in my life. I connected to the mother universe. I felt love. I cried for half of the night. I laughed for the other half. I cuddled myself for the other half of the night. After the session, after the 3 days, right, I had a purge on the 3rd night for about 4 hours. I got sick, and I could see my lower center, my first energy center, right, being cleared, just cleared of all that negative energy from my childhood and my past, right. When I went home, that was 2 years ago. I haven't had the calling for the ayahuasca since. It will call you. I'm not finished with it because I know I only cleansed my lower center and halfway through my second center. I still have my second and third center to really clean before I get in here to the heart chakra and really just open up, But I feel it happening naturally now as well at the moment. I'm starting to open up a little bit more, but you will have to, particularly now if you're doing these breathing exercises, because they're critical in terms of going in there ready and just surrendering completely into the experience. But it was the most profound experience that it gave me more than 10 years of psychotherapy in one night.
Yeah, that's what everyone says to me. Have you ever done the toad? Have you done the toad yet?
I've done the toad as well.
See?
I've done the toad. I got nothing off the toad though when I done it. I got nothing. I just got a light DMT trip off it.
Yeah. I think, when I feel ready, I probably will do it. But Timmy, I've got to be honest with you. Even when you were saying like I've only done like my first, my low chakra, and I've got my middle and my top one, I was thinking I'd have split each of them into 5. I've only done a 5th of my lower chakra. I've got to go back and do the second 5th.
But when it was like in the second evening and the third evening, the second evening was where the first evening was where I got all this love and sadness in the one night, and I felt the sadness that I would have felt as a young child going through the adversity that I was going through, and I felt that sadness and I was crying, and then I also felt the love. I felt the love that I was born with, the love that every human being was born with. I felt that. But on the second night when I was healing, I could feel this, I could see this green energy just coming up through my legs, past the first chakra, and it went into the second one, below your belly button, and it kind of it went to a halt. It was like, do you know where ice is freezing? It was like it stopped because it was after getting me to a certain place. I needed to go elsewhere, like go back out to the life and learn some more and come back and start doing more work on that chakra and to heal that, and I was happy with that, and I surrendered into that, and I accepted it, and I know I will go back, and that was, I'd say about 20 months ago now. It was Christmas.
Was it,
yeah.
Did you go abroad? Did you go to Peru or anything, or did you do it?
No, I
in
went
Ireland?
to a place in Ireland, in Waterford. There was a place called Inner Mastery. They facilitate a session, the ayahuasca sessions, but you can also do buffo down there, the frog. You can do combo. You can do iboga, which is great for people that are on heroin for complete abstinence. You know, it's a great plant medicine for that, and they have other stuff as well. You know, but it's an amazing place. You know, it changes people's lives. People that really can't get beyond certain states of being. You know, it really helped me in a massive way, and I'm glad I done it. You know, and I will. No, it doesn't work out that way for everybody, Josh. You need to be ready for it in your own life, and you need to know you're ready for it too. You know.
Yeah. No, I get that totally.
Right.
Legend.
Thanks.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Cheers. Appreciate it. Bye.